Good morning and welcome, and a big thank you for participating in this Part 2, Building Fundamentals of Augmentative and Alternative Communication by Developing Participation. We look forward so much to your feedback and comments. We use building as both as a noun and as a verb. Building is a structure that enables participation for children who use augmentative and alternative communication. Building is also a verb that joins together multiple parts. We applaud you in asking what are the essential principles of building participation using AAC, and look for the fun in fundamentals. In this session, you'll note that you'll receive a follow-up email after today's session, and where you'll find several links that will enable you to download a link to the presentation slides and get your certificate of attendance. In the follow-up email, you'll also find links to view video demos of the featured assistive technology as well as additional downloads. If you'd like to share a recording of today's session, it's available through a link on the AbleNet University webpage. Although technical difficulties are not the norm, I do share with you the following tips in order to ensure a good webinar experience. In addition to maximizing your screen by clicking on the link in the upper right-hand corner, please close any other applications that you're running that use bandwidth. If you hear an echo, you're probably logged in more than once. To remedy this situation, please close out of one of your connections. And if you experience the audio cutting in and out, you may have an unstable connection, usually from a wireless connection. Try clicking Mute Audio, wait a few seconds, then click Play Audio to reestablish the audio broadcast. Should you experience difficulty, please contact ReadyTalk, as unfortunately I cannot address such concerns now that the webinar has started.
And hello, this is Dr. Lesley Mayne, and I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Sharon Rogers. She is an AAC Specialist Extraordinaire. She's a professor, author, international presenter, and a practitioner. If you joined us for our last session, I spoke more to her presence at national and international AAC conferences. So we decided, so we wouldn't make this too boring if you did join us for the first, that we would provide you with, at the next 4 sessions, an anecdote, a story regarding a success a child has had with AAC that represents the stages we're presenting throughout our 5-part series. And with that, here is Dr. Sharon Rogers and her success story for building fundamentals.
Great. This is really funny. Nathan's a 7-year-old I was working with, and he uses eye gaze on a speech-generating device for greetings and preferences. Well, one of the first times I met him, I kept hearing, goodbye, 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 and I was sure he was just stuck on that button or practicing at that space, or maybe he was telling me something like go away. I also thought I maybe should try something different, like moving away from in front of the TV, where he just had to turn off Phineas and Ferb, his favorite TV program after school. So some weeks later, and several tries, we were celebrating my birthday with real candles and cupcakes, as Nathan accessed his device to say he wanted more cake or a drink of punch or make a wish. He was still using eye gaze on his speech-generating device when I started shutting down the program to go home. In the midst of telling him I had to leave, I heard, don't go, stay longer. I guess he told me, huh? Another little guy was busy eating his we were trying to get him to access his switch to play some music, which we were sure was his favorite thing to do. We tried it with peers. We tried it with him, with the aid. We tried it with rewards. Nothing worked. Finally, I turned off my video camera. I said, okay, David, if you hit your switch, it was placed at his cheek, and he could turn his head. If you hit your switch, I'll dance. Within 10 seconds, the music was on, and I was dancing. He was motivated. Lesley, as you know, is a speech-language pathologist and also a professor, and she's an amazing communication partner, both in speaking and in preparing these webinars. We laugh a lot and have fun getting ready. She teaches enthusiastically the graduate students at Cal State Fullerton in AAC, and Lesley knows AAC is a building like the palm of her hand. She knows the language, she knows the tools, and then she meets a child with complex physical and communication needs, listens to them, and turns communication into a verb and goes with it. So they have fun participating as being social human beings, figuring out the strategies that work for the child and the families. Achievement is synonymous with Lesley. Lesley, what's your favorite story about using AAC with a real kiddo?
Well, I'm working with this great little guy, and just this past week, we have been using the iTalk, so it's a binary switch through AbleNet, and he has been having it at his lap, which has been great, but he has motor skills that impede consistent use of the switch. So I decided I would put the switch up at his shoulder, similar to your story, having the switch at the shoulder, and he was looking at the switch, and he's telling me, there it is, I see it, and he rose to the occasion and had just some solid whacks. Like, I can do this. I can communicate at using these two switches at the corner. And I had the big switches, and I have on order 2 jelly bean switches that'll be smaller, in addition to the new candy corn switch. All these are from AbleNet, which is a proximity switch, so he won't have to be quite as accurate with his motor skills, but still be able to communicate. So, and I'll still use the iTalk too, because I can plug in the jelly bean switches into his iTalk too. So I'm really excited about that. And that's real life, and that's just happening now, so I'm very excited about that. So I think that's a good story for our building fundamentals stage. Now, here we are in part 2 of building fundamentals. April 30th, we talked about getting started, which was just establishing communication. What is the child doing? What can we do to elicit participation? And now today on May 9th, can you believe it's May 9th, we'll be talking about building fundamentals. So what can we do to expand that communication? If we had 1 way or 2 ways, can we move towards 3 or 4 ways to communicate? In addition, not just ways, but our words, the messages that the child is producing. Then on May 21st, we look forward to speaking to you about making connections. We're putting that webinar together now, and we're really excited about it, so we hope you join us for that. We'll give you a few snippets of what we'll be doing later. And then in bridging skills, we're talking about moving towards independence with participation. Child is probably more successful in certain contexts, like structured play, but maybe less successful in other areas, so we're still doing a lot of adult support to help the child make those bridging skills. And then finally on June 25th, we'll be talking about maximizing participation, so the child knows they have interaction skills that will work for them. And we know, of course, still the child is young, so they're going to be working on learning and becoming independent, but they're definitely on their way. So we look forward to sharing those ideas with you then.
In the first webinar, Getting Started was presented as a place where we were establishing accurately and sensitively interpreting what already existing modes of communication the child uses, their intent, and how those skills are fostered across listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Here we see a gal is riding the horse, but somehow needs to recognize the basic seating position to move forward easily. Basic fundamentals puts messages together. That means using verbs, not just nouns, looking for motivating actions. This makes communication even more fun, but verbs are harder to represent in icons, so may need a little extra teaching. And since AAC takes a lot of motivation to communication and to communicate, and so building fundamentals requires some extra time also. We're looking at commenting and taking turns, whether in listening and offering a comment or taking turns playing a board game with colors and numbers. Communication is kind of a dance, and each responding and interacting with each other. The children read their communication partners' intentions and responses, and these words build into the basic communication that the child then regulates their own behavior and recognizes that they're regulating other people's behavior too.
Last time we also spoke about Janice Light's 4 purposes of communication, and what we'll do in the next few webinars is continue to review those 4 purposes and then give you a link to how that relates to the stage that we're speaking about. So the 4 purposes of communication are social closeness for relationships, the words that work for this stage, such as give me a hug, hug doll, or go away. So we want words that both allow the child to seek closeness as well as maybe get rid of closeness that they don't want at the time. Information transfer of ideas and meanings. Now we're talking about letting the child know having the child tell us what they know. That cookie, I want that one. The big doll, the blue car. Any words, language, intents that tell us that we know what they are talking about, that's probably related to the curriculum or messages that they need to convey. Social etiquette conventions, hello and goodbye, and maybe even combining that, not just with the words, but with the nonverbals, with waving, actual waving. Or it could be head posturing or body posturing as well. And then wants and needs to regulate others' behaviors, which goes back to our preferences. And we talked about last time how those icons for wants and needs tend to dominate communication boards and books because they're easy. And in addition, I think as therapists and parents and teachers, we want to give those children the words to show what it is they want, and they're easier to do. We just also want to remember that we want to include social closeness, words for information transfer, and social etiquette. So we just want to keep that eye on that communication prize. I think I said that last time as well. Now, as we're moving towards two words that have the same meaning or intent, we also know that the repertoire might expand. So we want to include words for negation as well as wants and needs. A great source for language development is at the Printke-Romick Lab, and I'm going to give you the website later, but I'll give it to you now too. So that PRC Printke-Romick Language Lab at www.prc.com is a great resource to look at language stages. So for SLPs who may have done this before, it's a great way to say, yes, I'm on track. For people who may be newer to language and how it works, you can take a look at it and it will give you a little template. And I think we're good to go. All right. Next, we're going to talk about Janice Light's AAC competencies. So in addition to the purposes, what I really love about her competencies is that it gives you this template, this framework when you're actually putting together an AAC plan for a child. And you can take a look at this and say, okay, have I addressed each of these areas for the child as appropriate? So we're looking at linguistic needs, the language. How is the child processing receptive and expressive language? Comprehending symbolic language of AAC through drawings or sign language, certain codes, how they're using all forms of language. So that is the linguistic component. And we tend to focus on that one because we're focusing on building language, but an equal part of AAC is building the operational, social, and strategic competence. Operationally, we're talking about technical skill. It's not just our verbal language, but how are we using our body, how are we using tools to communicate. And then we'll look at the social, which is pragmatics, how they're interacting using that, which is what we're talking about so much with our participation. And then strategic, which is enlisting and utilizing support to get our communication across. So we'll go through each of those. We did just discuss the linguistic, so now I'll head into the operational competence, which I told you before is a technical skill, and it can be anything from forming the correct hand shape for manual signs or pointing or touching buttons on the speech-generating device to knowing how the actual device works, from turning the device on and off, maybe adjusting volume. It could be scanning of an AAC device, turning the pages of a communication book if you're using a picture exchange communication book, and then going back again to some of the fine motor and the attention and memory skills that it requires to operate a communication device. So we want to consider that. So when you're in an IEP meeting, you can think about, okay, I'm writing these language goals, but do I need an operational goal? Would it make sense to for a child who's using a picture exchange communication book for them to go to, the goal would be to go to the bookshelf to get their communication book in the morning to be able to express their messages. That might be a great worthy goal to have. Then we look at social competence from two perspectives, the socio-linguistic and then the socio-relational. And again, this is the great work of Janice Light. And Sharon will review what these principles are.
Yeah, the social linguistic, of course, it includes initiating, maintaining conversation, and terminating, even if it's all done or whatever. But we want to make sure that the child is stating their wants and needs about interaction with each other. And we want to include their requesting and protesting. The social relational is we want to promote a positive social image, children thinking of themselves as competent communicators. Take and display photographs of the children, put on clothes that make them look really nice, and tell the children what's going to happen next. Including them in anticipating routines brings understanding and delight. Children are interested in others but need to know how to communicate that using AAC, and they're interested in communication with these new tools. They want to reach across what have been barriers to their communication partners and put them at ease too.
I think what's great about this photo is you see two children engaged with the communication device, and one boy is holding the other boy's hand. So you sort of see that that social interaction of this joint interaction that's going on, which I think is amazing, as well as the message. One thing I do regarding the social interaction whenever I'm working with someone who uses a communication device is encourage the eye contact between messages. Because the emphasis of the message can lend itself towards the tool that's being used, it's great. Use that tool to have the message and then encourage that eye contact, or encourage the child to turn the AAC tool towards the communication partner. That is really important to keep that engagement going so that the message doesn't stay on the communication device. So I incorporate that, and I encourage you to incorporate that into your goals and your procedures when you're teaching pragmatics. Next, we take a look at strategic competency. So how are we going to get the job done? This competency really requires a lot of the child, but ultimately AAC requires a lot of the child. We're asking them to generate a message, recall what messages they wanted to generate, program it, and then produce it, and then recall that they need to use that eye contact to communicate. So with strategic competency, this is what do I need to do to really make sure I get my message across? So they need to recognize that they might need to augment or compensate for their communication, such as holding up 4 fingers while they're saying 4. So if it's misarticulated, they can use their nonverbals to support their message. If they're using a communication device that's a static display, so just pictures like a textbook or a communication board, using pointing to support the message that they are trying to say. So it is essentially competency that helps support, clarify, optimize the efficiency of the message. And then repairing messages as well. No, that's not what I meant to say. Let me try again. That's really important to have on a communication board. So we want to also, a child might use it to enlist and support a communication partner to help them get their AAC tools up and running. So if you're using a high-tech communication device, and the child has a greater degree of independence, but they might require help getting it started. So maybe it's teaching the child to go to an adult to help them get started with their communication. So that's the strategic competency, which sort of blends into social competency sometimes, because people say, well, isn't it social because you're having them go to an adult? And that's true, but the idea behind the strategic is to make that message that much more clarified, to get wants and needs to a means to an end.
That's good.
Okay.
We thought we'd put together the competencies in a visual representation here of how it might work out. Here are the linguistic competencies: choosing the preferred instrument, deciding on a tune, singing along with musical notes and different sounds. The operational competence is each of the instruments and how they work. The social, that they're all playing together and be heard by the others. And strategic, like any other orchestra, they have to have one person signaling when to get started, keeping together, and when to finish. So, what and how is a child communicating now? Keep in mind, verbalization may be vocalization. The child may be producing word approximations or a word production. They may be telling us important messages with their hands, their arms, their legs, turning their heads or leaning in. Aided, that is using speech-generating devices, or recognizing the message on the switch, or it requires a time for learning and using, but it is motivating. Look at how the symbol, the icon, the picture that's being used. We'll talk more about tools later, but the most important part is that communication uses every mode that the child has. They, like anyone else, use their bodies to communicate as well as these new speech-generating devices.
So we know this is a slide that you've already seen before if you joined us in part 1, but we just wanted to reiterate all the different possible ways you can communicate and to keep them sort of in the forefront, that you do have these unaided and aided. And I find it helpful in IEP meetings with parents to review some of these so they go, okay, I understand that there's all these different modes and ways that my child can communicate. And then I find that IEP team members jump onto the ideas a little bit more. It sort of clears things up for them.
So building fundamentals agenda for today, what was I supposed to do? Okay, we begin with social interaction because we know that's so motivating. We're going to talk about communication skills and activities, and then talk about teachable suggestions for facilitators that might help facilitate this interaction and social interaction going on. We're talking about beginning literacy skills and choosing vocabulary, AAC tools and access methods, and, of course, troubleshooting. Building fundamentals for social interaction is about friendships with each other, helping each other to participate in getting the job done. Peers become communication partners and recognize the child's communication. They learn the symbols, and they can enjoy them with each other. Why are we developing participation? The purpose is authentic communication that's motivating. Andrew Solomon, who wrote the book Far from the Tree, talks about the experience of parenting children with differences. He writes that parents and siblings conclude that even though their children have complex physical and communication needs, they too are motivated most by being with other people and by being social. As one occupational therapist told me, completion of a task for her is more a question of interest than of ability. Participation involves action, movement, of many parts of the child's body and mind. Their participation may be different, but developing participation is a basic fundamental. Expressing the child's unique identity, their preferences, their style, requires our waiting and understanding. How are they telling us? If the child's genuine participation yields an emotional response so the child makes a difference, they belong, they contribute, they're having fun.
So ideas for social interaction, this is where we're going to head into next. So we have modeling and eliciting questions. What's that? So it may serve the child in a couple different ways. One, to engage a child in asking what they're doing, and also to gain information. So it's what's that can really get us started. One idea might be to be that Pied Piper when you head into that class. Go in with the cool toys and gain permission from neurotypical children, the term coined by the great Dr. Tony Atwood, and work on social interaction skills, which is play skills, just to start playing together. If this whole idea is new, about what kind of language you should be using. Just what I have my students do in classes, I take in a bunch of toys and I tell them to play with the games and think about the language that they're using, because often, again, we'll get the nuts and bolts of the colors and the shapes and the sizes and maybe the names, but think about all the words that you're using while you're playing that game. Oh, good job, no way, things that are really being communicated but may not end up on a communication device, and they're so important. And you'll find once you have those programmed how much other kids are going to want to be a part of that, and they want to express those messages as well. So give that a shot, and you'll see just communication come to life for the child and for the friends who are joining in. You may want the interaction to surround a linguistic goal, which, of course, obviously we want to build language too. So if you're working on vocabulary concepts or expanding utterances, that is obviously a tremendous goal. And if the goal is social interaction, use yourself or the child as a model, or actually other children too, because oftentimes they have the best, most current phrases to use, and make sure you're staying really current. So model and include the child in the turn-taking, and again, include words for success or mistakes, spontaneous interjections, and have a child begin to make some choices for group activities as well. So we absolutely love this drawing. If you take a look, you can see full inclusion going on. We see happy children seemingly flying on top of the world, but it's really just a beautiful day with friends. The sun is shining, and when you look a little more closely, you see the wheelchairs, the canes, and the kids wearing glasses. I see happiness and joy. So what kind of fun can we have? And what we see here are a series of skills and activities. The goal is to use existing skills and increase language and communication or build on the foundation of these skills. So you see I Spy, daily routines, Mr. Potato Head. That's probably nothing surprising to anybody. But one concept I wanted to talk about was the joint reference and joint attention. We know more about joint attention, that we want our thoughts and ideas and our eyes and our focus to be on the same task. But we also want to make sure that we have joint reference. So psychologists say we really need joint reference before we have joint attention. Joint reference indicates that your attention is on the same object. Joint reference is a form of communicative act in which two people may look at something and then at each other. So I'm not here to argue, the fine points of the joint reference or the joint attention, but I think it's an interesting example for at times a child could be looking at something, you could be looking at something, but it doesn't mean you're communicating about that act together. So once you have your eyes and you know the child is engaged, the joint attention comes into play when you look at each other, when there's this connection between the people that, okay, look at that. I can see that. You can see it. Now we have that joint attention. So just make sure you have that backed up, that you have your joint reference and then your joint attention. So when you're looking at daily routines, such as dressing, feeding, or bathing, you can state your preferences, or the child would state preferences, work on routines to help facilitate transition, really helps self-regulation, and helps predict the physical action as well as the language. Now you might be saying, but wait a minute, you want me to take a communication board or a 3 to 5 step sequence into the bathtub. And I have 2 words for you, and that's called clear contact paper. That's true. Sorry. Clear contact paper. You can pick it up at the store and you can quickly laminate sequence icons or icons that you want to use, and they can wipe off and be in a better place. There are laminating sheets. They're a little bit more expensive though. And they're a little more clear than the contact paper, but contact paper is just a nice, inexpensive way to go. That might be a nice way to deal with water, which also might be at the beach, too, if you're going to take water near a river or a lake or beach. We're from California. Sorry, we're in Southern California, so we had to throw in the beach. But if you're near any body of water, get your contact paper. All right. Okay, something else I want to tell you. Okay, you have Mr. Potato Head, which of course you can use for identifying and labeling body parts, get the prepositions, and having fun with interactions. If you're an iPad aficionado, AbleNet has a free app called Sounding Board, and within a session I have taken a potato head with a few icons that I know the child will be working on, and made a communication board. And I didn't feel guilty about doing it during the therapy session because it put together really, really quickly. I was able to take the photo, upload it, put my language in, and was ready to go. So I really encourage you, if you haven't downloaded the free Sounding Board app from AbleNet, to do so, because it's a really nice tool. You can upload 1 to 9 icons per board, so you can start very basically and build up. It's just a wonderful tool to have. Next, here is Fun with Literacy, and this comes from the great Judy Montgomery. She's also out here in California, and she years ago told me about this great literacy nugget. You can take a really fun book of your choice into class or therapy or home and share the story with the child or children, depending on if it's a group, and go ahead and read that story. Then the next day you come back and you create anticipation of finding the same book either in your bag or maybe around. So have it in your bag, read it again, and have the child identify the key characters or the objects, whatever your language target is. The next day you come back and you hide that same book in the room, and they have to go around and find it somehow. And maybe it's the same target, or maybe it's a different target where you're having the child finishing the sentences because they've now heard this 3 times. So can you get some prediction, some anticipation of what's going on? And then finally on that fourth day, bring in the same book again and wrap it in a box. And they open the box with the child. You have this great anticipation. They're reading the book, and you can follow up again with the keywords or finishing the sentences or any other literacy task. It might be too much to expect that the child would go from remembering the characters to finishing the phrases and sentences and doing a lot of predicting, so of course you would keep it appropriate for the child. But I think that great love and anticipation that here comes this amazing book again really builds that joy for communication and the joy for literacy.
There are a couple of books that I have used that are really kind of fun. Janice had used one that I like, which is It's Not Easy Being a Bunny. It's by Marilyn Sadler. Maybe you'd like the Knuffle Bunny or Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus by Mo Williams. They're still good. Even reading books like Carl without printed words gives the child rich language input. So there are lots of fun books out there. Would welcome your suggestions.
So now, our Facilitator Strategies. Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third. If you haven't listened to this routine in a while, pull it up on YouTube. It's a kick, and sometimes we just need a little fun. And this can also describe our experience at times. So you have different professionals or parents or everybody who kind of has an idea of where they're going, and you're probably saying the same message but maybe in a different way. So we need to take a step back and make sure we understand each other and just communicate and clarify and talk about what we need to know and what we need to do next to move forward to be efficient communicators for ourselves and for our kids.
Our goal is to increase opportunities for the child and the places that they can communicate and participate. And we want to encourage the child's initiation and to wait for the child's genuine responses, not just what we expect and program into them. So we broaden the exposure to the text, to people, to experiences, to use of language, to success with language. We're figuring if someone could take 15 to 20 minutes working up to maybe 2 or 3 times a day, that would be great. It doesn't have to be just one person. It can be several people. And children do have an opinion, and so we can ask them who they'd like to use this with. Much like the theory of natural consequences, where you follow through with a child's request, here you look for and wait for the child to initiate. Often children are out of practice since so many of their initiations are overlooked. The first few sessions you may need to prove you are really meaning it. The heart in the drawing tells us that this waiting is out of love, not impatience or not just doing the assignment. Expand the quality of the interaction, go beyond the hey to what's up, to other responses, to extend the conversation by suggesting great to see you, which way you're going, commenting on a sporting event or a common interest such as a class activity, current event. Notice how the child indicates preferences and interest in other people and other topics. As one author noted, if the child is fascinated, has expertise and strengths in learning about whales, just give him the whale with oodles of words and find a way to teach AAC using the whale. Size, color, parts of the body, can be a rich language experience.
And this would be a good time for us to introduce Sarah Blackstone and Mary Huntberg's social networks. It's a tool, it's a communication tool that was updated in 2012. And I think when we're talking about expanding the child's communication partners, it's like, well, we're not sure, who are all the communication partners? How do they communicate? What can they possibly communicate? How do we get our hands around this? Well, thanks to Sarah Blackstone and Mary Huntberg, we have a tool. And you can check it out definitely. But they look at circles of interaction ranging from life partners, so that's kind of family, people who are close to the child, friends, acquaintances, staff members, and unfamiliar communication partners. So it's this outstanding tool that leads you logically to ask good questions about how the child, or it's for adults too, but in our case, for our purposes, we're talking about how the child interacts with different people, what tools do they use, how effective is the interaction, and then by completing the protocol, you see the opportunities for growth, and you learn about the child, things maybe that you didn't know before. For example, there might be some kids at school that the child interacts with, maybe even briefly, but those brief interactions make a difference. And you can learn about those and go, wow, this is how he's communicating or she's communicating. So it's just a great way to learn and explore more and give yourself a real solid direction on where to go next. So we head into literacy skills, and last week, my son reported that his vision seemed blurry to his father, which he replied, "Are you talking about girls or your eyes?" To which he reported rather frustratingly, both. He's a preteen. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that we're just talking about literacy now. But what can we do to support literacy skills for building fundamentals?
Well, this picture indicates that the importance of a motivating reading activity for this dog. Cats require the dog's undivided attention. Ask a person who doesn't speak, like Annie McDowell, a child with cerebral palsy who lives in Australia, and she'll tell you that the power of literacy lies within us all.
So when you're creating literacy opportunities in this stage, we're looking at signs. They're the most obvious first symbol that we learn that lead us to recall and recognize our favorite ice cream shop, a pizza parlor, restaurants, toys. Safety signs also are important, just obviously to make sure our kiddos are safe. And finally, knowledge about print, reading from left to right, left to front to back, top to bottom, that sort of thing. And then drawing and writing simple shapes using dry erase board, doodle buddies, really just exploring the opportunities for literacy, which is reading and writing.
What's the adult role in literacy? Well, in webinars 2 through 5, we'll introduce the idea of narrative development or telling stories, and we'll do it in several parts. This is based on the work of Sadao and Robinson, their book in 2010. We believe that adults fill in the missing information, but this is personally relevant to the child. So we'll use strong feeling words to tell about the child's experience, because that assists in remembering what the event really was. For the child entering primary grades, they'll get the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story, those important parts. And then you can begin to listen to and identify sounds and introduce the letter that goes with the sound correspondence. Can begin first initial of the child's name, the beginning of a letter for a child's mom.
Some other literacy tips include the following: learning about print and page orientation. What is the child learning? Are they aware of the characters, to the action? To what degree are they? So now's a good time to push and see how far the child's understanding is going, and by asking some questions. Is the story about a cat or a dog? And then make it advance. Is the dog helping the man or the lady? Did it work? There may be good days and bad days with a child's ability to express comprehension, especially with AAC, maybe motor impairments or other issues going on with the child, so you can expect some fluctuation. For the child with vision needs, you can accommodate for visual neuropathies by trying to get an idea where their vision is for the day, where there might be spaces in their vision where you can allow the materials to be in the visual field that works for them. And then other days providing longer opportunities for gazing when the child kind of demonstrates that desire. Another opportunity is to consider physical access to the print, such as slant boards for writing and Velcro to stabilize print if it's moving around. And we just want to keep asking those good questions, seeking that opinion and confirmation and to build that comprehension. So let's revisit communication real quick. We have talked about some literacy strategies and other communication activities. So what are we doing to access the literacy? Is the child using direct selection? What types of tools are working? How are they getting that done? And what's next? Would some low-tech page flippers, such as Velcro or raised edges, help? Would a switch be a good idea to add to the situation? Like, let's turn the page, I'm ready to move on, I want to hear that again. Is the reading level of the books adequate? And now's a good time to say, okay, we've got our reading level and we have our interest level. So I'm going to use Janice Light Stages. If you look up Janice Light, Penn State University, she has a full literacy program, so check that out. And you're going to be working on building those literacy skills, but there's also the interest level for the child, and that would just be reading to them. So getting content to them, getting the story and the flow, in addition to this is how you learn how to read. One great comment from our first webinar in Getting Started came from a woman who said, my son learned to read before he learned to speak. It's probably more common than people realize. And I think it was a really great point, because our kids come at us and they tell us what they know, and they find a way to communicate, and it may not follow the typical stages of development. And you meet them and you revel in that success, and you move forward, whether it meets a standard profile or not. So a little bit more on revisiting communication, looking at what the behaviors the child is showing you, that he or she is connected to the material. Sometimes you can't quantify it. I can sit in meetings and they say, well, how do you know what you know? It's like, well, you can see it in their eyes, especially if mobility is an issue. But you can see it, you can feel that joint reference, that joint attention to the material. And sometimes I'll often highly encourage people to come to observe in those tougher situations where it's something you can't quantify, because they can't give me a trial by hitting a switch. They can't do that. But boy, you can see that the intent is there. You can see the joy in their eyes. And how do you quantify joy? But it's there. I was just reviewed by my administrator yesterday, and she said, oh, look at everything this child can do. And this was sort of a child maybe people thought couldn't do so much. I think I introduced our last webinar. Can he do anything? Right in front of the child? Yes, he can. So my administrator came and saw everything this child could do, and it was really a treat for me to show everybody what a child can do. So write down, what are the signs that this child demonstrates to wait or to read again or to continue? Can you see now a way to head towards independent communication as we move towards bridging skills? So keep thinking, keep that cap going. I'm here now. This is what I can do now. What are we going to be able to do next?
I can see a little kid being ready to blow out a candle, and it takes a little while to get those muscles together, but they're ready to blow, and they hurry on to the next thing, and he's missed the chance to be the blower this time.
Right. And I had one hiccup where I wanted to move forward with a child, and so the child who was using the I Talk to at his waist, so I thought, let's go straight to a Bluetooth so he can access a higher tech communication device. But he didn't have quite the motor skills to do that. So that's where I said, okay, that's where I'm going to go next. But now I need to take a step back, and that's where we're trying the switches at the shoulders. So I'm going to try again. But that's, when we have that established. So sometimes it's step forward, step back.
We look at vocabulary, and that too can be fun. When the child likes Darth Vader, use big words like bodacious. Mary Poppins taught us that supercalifragilisticexpialidocious was really fun and funny to say. I remember when Ninja Turtles were the rage, I thought the boys I was working with needed 2-syllable words, until I overheard a noontime conversation with Michelangelo and Raphael, and now there's a little gal, Pinkalicious, which is very, very motivating. So practice options for vocabulary. Practice the questions, what's that? The child can ask, what's that? And the adult can ask, what's that? And then find the icon or objects on the speech-generating device or communication board. You can look for illustrations in a book or parts of a child's body for Mr. Potato Head or an object in I Spy. Use a book reader or a tablet to share reading with friends. Discuss possible actions of characters in the story and see if the child agrees or disagrees. If you're reading, don't let the pigeon eat the hot dog, you ask the question, do you think the pigeon wants to share his hot dog since he does everything possible to get away from it? Use these pronouns, I and you, for turn-taking, prepositions for potato head, in and out, on and off, over, under. And then you can add sizes and colors to favorite objects like big red car, little yellow car for the car race. So, what are some of the adult rules with vocabulary?
We talked a little bit about core and fringe vocabulary last time, so let's start maintaining a core vocabulary list. So our core words, again, are words we commonly use, and our fringe words are words that are unique to the child. So if there's an action figure that the child likes, that would be a core word. Taco is a core word. Fringe word would be Buzz Lightyear with his special blue utility belt. And if they want that specific one, that's what they want. Or, I don't just want a taco, I want to go to Taco Bell. Or I want to go to Taco Deli, that's our favorite place. When this list gets too long, then congratulations. That's when we're heading into making categories. So you might want to keep that in mind when you're headed into a list where you say, I can't keep up with this list. Well, great. Fantastic. That is a wonderful thing. So, now one trick from an academic perspective is trying to keep up with vocabulary that's going on in the classroom. And what I've done is gone to the textbook room to see if I can get a copy of the text. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. So when it doesn't, I'll go to the teacher and see if I can borrow their text and go back to the chapter summaries or get the vocabulary from the lessons that they're going to be working on, and then at least I have the list and can go from there to build the academic vocabulary. So we're talking about participation, but it's not just socially, it's about being able to connect, because we talked about the importance of information transfer. Well, this is the language where they're going to be able to express the information that they know. So that is really important. And then when you're working with building wordplay, there's just a series of strategies for you to work with. So you can match the go-together words just like you may have done to build with pictures. You can start with pictures. You can have the pictures with the labels. You can match a picture to the written word or match a written word to an icon to a definition. So you can take it wherever it is you need to go, but just point being, keep to the important academic vocabulary as well as our social vocabulary.
So if you were thinking of an animal that barks, they look for the dog. Mm-hmm. Or if you think of the toothbrush goes with the toothpaste, one of those obvious things that they have. Mm-hmm.
So with our building fundamentals, we're talking about language expansion. So we're looking at if we've got one word or one idea, can we expand that to 2 to 4? And I talked to you before about the AAC Language Lab. There is the website for you. And the other important part is the heading into the ability to ask questions. It has to be explicitly taught. I've tried to find some great tools for, like on apps and that sort of thing. Somebody needs to write a great app for kids learning to ask questions, because that's the one frontier that I haven't been able to see yet. But often what I'll do is ask the child the question and then have them find their questions on their communication device and help them restructure. In addition to asking questions, we need, again, for them to have ways to say no. Although you may not want them to learn to say no, but they need to have that opportunity to say no, I don't, I'm not, that sort of thing. So check out, again, the PRC Language Lab resources. Then we head into building fundamentals, tools, and access. So given we have 2 devices here from AbleNet. One is the Jive. It's a handheld that weighs about 12 ounces. It's size 3x5, has predictive typing and some word lists, environmental control, and comprehensive messaging options, which is really amazing. And then there's the Super Talker. It has 1 to 8 messages with 8 levels, 16 minutes of recorded time with key guards, which is really nice. 2 toy or appliance output jacks, so you can use them to play with toys, and it is battery operated, so 2 AA batteries, which is nice. So here's a little bit of a higher tech tool. I know we've mainly been talking about switches, but I also told you in part 1 that sometimes heading to mid or higher tech is a good way to go to give the child more option, more exposure to language, so that we're not holding them back. And in certain cases, that would be absolutely valid. More tools for building fundamentals include talking photo albums. Mayor Johnson has a great tool for a talking photo album, so you put in your pictures. It could be remnants from activities that you've done, field trips. It could be family and friends, anything that the child would like to talk about. I've actually used it with a child with second language acquisition as well for basic communication skills. So you can use those talking photo albums for lots of different options. And again, we talked about switches, but AbleNet just came out. I couldn't help but put this on because it's cute. They have skins now for their switches, which is just great. And there are lots of different colors and types, so you can check it out at AbleNet. But the Jelly Bean switch, again, is good for those single words or phrases or messages. So you can have a short conversation, actually, on these Jelly Bean switches. So that's nice. So we really enjoy those skins. I'm glad those came out. A few more tools. I've talked a lot about the iTalk 2. It's the dual switch, the binary switch for expressing choices. One option is if you're not sure if your child's ready for that dual switch, I'll just program one side for language development. You could also program one side or the other as an operational development. Say they're not used to accessing both sides, or you're working on motor control for access. You can program only one side, so it can be more of an operational tool or a language tool. So keep that in mind. Your environmental control switch to run blenders or toys or lights. One thing with toys, if you have a visually impaired child, it might be scary. So warn them, because sometimes the toys make some sounds which might be completely fun and adorable to one, but frightful to another. So I ran into that, and I was so excited for my new, I think it was a cow or a frog, and the poor child just got completely mortified by the sound. And another child absolutely loved it. We also spoke about visual scenes in Part 1 to allow a child to increase language complexity. A visual scene, for example, is a picture of
the park,
or a bedroom, or of the art center at school, and then the child can make requests from those pictures. Another idea is to use tablet technology, the Androids, the iPads, to access communication, education, and fun. So they're a lovely tool to have in our repertoire. More tools. I use dry erase boards like crazy. Love those dry erase boards. Great for supporting language. I'll use them just for primary communication or to write down a message, and then the child can see the message and work then in putting icons together. There are various book readers on various technologies that I'm assuming you guys know all about. And then here are a couple apps that I think are great to help develop literacy. MeGenius has nice kind of level 1, level 2, maybe even up to level 3 stories on them, which is really great. I like ReadMe as well. It's shorter stories, maybe for getting started with learning stories, a lower elementary, probably more like preschool level. And then when your child advances, you might want to go to more of a MeGenius. And then the Morris story is just this amazing book. It was written by a former Pixar artist, and it's the most interactive, extraordinarily visually amazing book I've ever seen. Great little story. It's $4.99 though. It's a little more expensive than a lot of the apps, but it's just an absolute winner. Can't wait till he comes out with more. And then finally, another option you should know about from a book reading perspective is Bookshare. And there's the website for you. It helps people with print disabilities of all ages gain free access to books. And the nice part of it is you have a visual representation as well as the auditory. They're headed towards 191,000 selections, and so it's extraordinary. Membership is free for schools and people with disabilities. And a lot of publishers who normally would not relinquish their rights to their books are relinquishing, or I don't know if that's the right word, but allowing their books to be on Bookshare for people with disabilities to access, so that's amazing. All right, now we're heading into troubleshooting. You've seen television, nobody knows. So sometimes we have trouble. So we're going to look at troubleshooting in the building fundamental stage from 2 perspectives, just like we did in the last webinar. The first one includes issues dealing with implementation, and the second one deals with language and symbol considerations.
Troubleshooting, this is from the trenches. Implementation means you use the AAC in many different places, many times, with many people. Take the speech generating device with you from home to school, with peers, with other adults. Try it out with relatives you meet, or begin with familiar people, like Lesley was talking about, to be the potential communication partners using AAC, but making AAC communication work for the child and encouraging the child to become real communication partners can happen with anybody. Think through how the child is using his or her smiles, vocalizations, rolling his eyes to indicate lack of interest, and praise the child for using all those tools. Decide if there's a low-tech device which would fit the scene better, but your decision involves the child's preference and experiences too. And for the symbol consideration, think through what the icons are the child is using. It's really important to have some consistent ones. Having the drawing references reflect the child's own culture and family. Boardmaker from Mayor Johnson and Symbol Sticks are two favorite systems with drawings for nouns and verbs. Look to see what languages the words are printed in. There's some they're similar in price, but be consistent so the child doesn't have to learn two different systems. Some have more representations than other, and some add to them for the current events. Pretke-Ramic, a speech-generating device vendor, has their own symbols that are language-based. And the iPad may use different symbols for different applications, so be careful that these aren't confusing to the child. Make sure that these make sense to the child and their communication partner. So,
you know, we had one question that said, can you give us resources for visual scenes? And I think one of the best resources for all of AAC is Buchelman and Miranda's textbook. It's a new version in 2013. It just came out. And it's Augmentative and Alternative Communication Management of Severe Communication Disorders in Children and Adults. And they have a full expanded information on visual scenes.
I think there's something on AAC.RERC.website that has a video about visual scenes.
So go to www.RERC, and there's a tremendous wealth of resources on not just visual scenes, but that's where you find Janice White's literacy information and just a plethora of information. So absolutely go visit there. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah. Well, this space shows how we feel when we get the fun and fundamentals right. The emotions are engaged, the action's happening, the child and the communication partners feel success. They want more. So in case you're feeling the fun of tuning into AAC, we'll be ready with Part 3, Making Connections, May 21st, and Part 4 and 5, June 4th and 25th. Thank you so much for participating, and thanks to Gloria Olson and the AbleNet University.
Absolutely, and we did have one other question, actually two more questions. One, what's the name of the tool that we talked about? And we will repeat the RERC, we heard that too. So the name of the tool is Social Networks by Blackstone and Huntberg. So Social Networks. And then the RERC is the
AAC-RERC.
Okay, so say that one more time.
www.aac-rerc.com.
Okay, so we have another question. What is the name of the tool for determining communication partners? Oh, okay, we just said that. And again, that's the Social Networks by Sarah Blackstone and Mary Hunt-Berg.
Okay, after this session is over, keep your browser open, and a short survey will appear on your screen. Your opinion matters to AbleNet and to us, so please take a moment to complete that form. AbleNet is proud to offer webinar sessions dedicated to professional development offerings that keep you up to date on emerging assistive technology and curricular solutions. So look for listings and emails or visit the AbleNet University website to see the schedule of upcoming live professional development sessions. I invite you to like AbleNet on Facebook and follow AbleNet on Twitter for all the latest and including updates on this development, other products and promotions. And don't forget about the vast library of free recorded archived webinars. I invite you to be part of this. Don't you love the able focus on this slide? Capable, attainable, remarkable. That means pleasing, encouraging, delightful. Don't close your browser quite yet. A short survey will pop up. it'll automatically submit when you're done. Thank you again for your time and your interest. We'll be back in tune later.
Bye-bye. Thank you.